Now, let's turn back to domestic politics. And people who vilify Britain will be treated as extremists if Rishi Sunak becomes Prime Minister. Under the former Chancellor's plans, they will be referred to the government's Prevent programme. Well, joining us now is Dr. Rakib Ehsan. He's a social policy analyst and he's an expert on racial identity, social integration and national security. Rakib, welcome to the show. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Aisha.
What do you make of Rishi Sunak's proposal?
Well, I think that the proposal has very serious problems, if truth be told. The plans essentially look to expand the existing definition of extremism and broaden the scope of Prevent. And ultimately, the risk here is that people who are perceived to be vilifying Britain, who may well be law-abiding, simply cynical and disaffected, they could be dragged into the government's de-radicalisation Prevent programme. And I think that it's an example of a politician who perhaps has ventured into a policy space that he's not particularly familiar with. And you can see that there is a backlash, because the risk here is that people who may well be very critical of the British capitalist system, society in general, how it works, quite critical of the existing system of democratic governance, they may well be referred to the programme, and that in turn could mean that it will be overburdened with cases where the individuals hold no extremist tendencies.
Yeah, I think you're right, Rakib. I think, Rishi Sunak, his sort of hinterland is the economy, really. It does feel, I think that's a really good observation. It sort of feels like he's been dragged into this territory because of the Tory leadership contest, and he's not very sure-footed on it.
I agree. And I think that, Aisha, if I'm being perfectly honest, I think there's a certain insecurity within the Sunak campaign when it comes to his patriotic credentials. I'm sure that you can remember the controversy surrounding the Green Card, his wife's tax arrangements. So I think what you see here, there's possibly a case of overcompensation. Now, of course, I think that the majority of British people are proud of their British identity. They think that Britain on the whole is a tolerant, welcoming country. But I also feel that the mainstream overall values freedom of expression. And I do feel here that the line between what could be considered to be the radical vilification of Britain and what are perfectly legitimate criticisms in terms of how things work in Britain in a social, economic and cultural sense. Who gets to decide that line? Because I think that there will be fears that by expanding the definition of extremism, this could be ultimately used as an instrument to extend state authority. And I think that if there is that risk of undermining freedom of expression and political dissent, then actually what you're doing is hugely counterproductive, because you're undermining British liberal democracy.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And listen, final question to you, Rakib. Just interested to get your thoughts on this. I mean, yesterday we had the news of the CIA killing the leader of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. I spoke with a number of counter-terrorism experts and anti-extremism experts afterwards, and they say that it'll be interesting to see who the new leader is of Al-Qaeda and what that means for radicalising young people across the world, but, here in the UK, in America. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that generally, when we're talking about the UK, I think that one thing within Rishi Sunak's broader plans when it comes to counter-extremism, he did say that overall our counter-extremism activities, they need to be refocused towards Islamist extremism, which is the prevailing terror threat in the UK. Of course, that means that we shouldn't be complacent over far-right extremism, which is the fastest growing.
Yes.
But I think in terms of what's going on more broadly in a global sense, I think there needs to be an understanding among our counter-extremism intelligence communities that the very phenomenon of extremism is becoming increasingly globalized. And I think you see those international cyber networks ultimately facilitating the growth of extremism in the UK. So that's something that our political leaders and also intelligence communities really have to be wary of.
Listen, it's been fascinating speaking with you, Rakib. Thanks very much for your time this afternoon. That's Dr. Rakib Ehsan, who is a social policy analyst, and he's an expert on racial identity, social integration and national security. Well,